Yep, I see your PowerPoint now.
Perfect. So welcome everyone. Today is Thursday, February 28th, and we're excited for another America Saves event that is taking place. And one of my soapbox topics, if there is one, if just one, it would be student loans. This is something that I absolutely am so passionate to talk about and want people to be as educated as possible around student loans. So my name is Amy Irvine. I'm a CFP and an enrolled agent, and my business is actually in Corning, New York, although today I'm recording live from what happens to be rather sunny here in Florida, Parrish, Florida. And this is being recorded, so if you do have any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat and I'll answer them, or send me a note and I'll make sure to get back to you. Our goal today is to really educate you as much as we can in 45 to 50 minutes about student loans. Now, student loans are like drinking from the fire hose. And for those of you that may have attended any of my webinars in the past about student loans, you know this is one of my favorite pictures because it's a lot of information and it's actually just the tip of the iceberg. So when we think about looking at it from like a 5,000 million foot level, yes, I'm exaggerating, that's what we're doing today. It's really high level only. So that is the disclaimer for today, that we're not going to be answering a lot of very specific questions. We're just trying to get you educated so that you can go and explore some additional questions. So let me take a step back for just a moment and explain why I get on a soapbox about student loans. So student loans are now $1.5 trillion of outstanding debt. 1.5 trillion, trillion with a T, capital T. That's $620 billion more than total credit card debt in the US. $620 billion. That's just mind-blowing. You know, if you've ever watched that commercial and they have that person that the purple blows out of the top of their head, that's how I feel every time I make that comment. Unfortunately, it's the new normal that's killing graduates and causing this great financial stress. Both my colleague Becky Partridge and I were working with a young woman the other day, and her student loan repayment amount was $2,600 a month. That was her student loan repayment amount, $2,600 a month. It's just mind-blowing. Like, she couldn't move out of her parents' house because of that. The average debt of a four-year graduate, this is just 4 years. This is not graduate school. This is not doctorate school. This is 4 years. It's $37,000. You start getting into the higher levels of education. Now you're talking $100,000, $200,000 that you're going to walk out of college with student loan debt. It is absolutely blocking dreams and affecting credit because people just are like, well, I don't know where you want me to come up with this money. And they don't know what the options are, unfortunately. And so it's killing some of our youth and their parents' credit, because guess who co-signed for these loans? And it's putting many of their dreams much more further into the future, and definitely their savings opportunities. Because if you have a big student loan payment and you've got rent, yeah, you'd love to save, but where's the money going to come from? So let me take a deep dive into the types of student loans that exist. So there are federal education loans, which either fall under the William D. Ford Federal Direct program, and then the federal family education loans. Now, with the William D. Ford Federal Direct program, that's what we see as direct loans. You can have subsidized or you can have unsubsidized. So the subsidized loans are for undergraduate school, and that means that the government is actually paying the interest on those loans. So as you're going through college, interest is not accruing on those loans. It's being paid by somebody else. Unsubsidized loans says you don't have to make a payment on anything, but we are going to accrue the interest while you're in school. So if you borrow $5,000 and then you graduate, it may be that at the time that you start making payments, it's actually $6,000 that they at that point in time base the payments off from. So Unsubsidized loans create some additional burden in and of themselves, and they don't require financial need, and you can use them for both graduate and professional students. Now, again, I mentioned earlier, my colleague Becky Partridge, she actually writes a weekly Financial Friday tip around student loans. And a couple of weeks ago, she posted something that said, you know, one way to get out of college with a little bit lower debt is to take a part-time job and use that money to pay the interest on the unsubsidized loans while you're in college, so that if you actually borrow $5,000, you're going to owe $5,000 at the end. So you're staying on top of it. And in many cases, we talk about the power of compounding interest. Well, this is where the power of compounding interest can actually be a negative, because when you think about how interest builds on these student loans, it can be very detrimental to the long-term pocketbook. Plus loans are another type of loans. Those can be used for graduate or professional students, and they're generally for parents of undergraduate students. And again, those loans don't require financial need. And then another type of loan is considered a consolidated loan, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a few more slides. But those are the primary type of student loans. And then you can also have a private loan. Everything that I've just given you is actually considered, for the most part, a public loan. Consolidated loans can be either government loans consolidated or private, but everything above of the consolidated loans would, in most cases, they would be considered federal loans, which is really, really important when we talk about public service loan forgiveness. So who are those public loan servicers? So a lot of people will say, I don't know if I have public loans or if I have private loans. I'm, you know, I should, but I don't. And we don't judge when people say that. We understand this stuff is very confusing, but usually if you see these companies listed on your statement, then they are generally considered public loan servicers. I'm not going to say always, but they are generally considered public loan servicers. So you've got your student loans. What are the options that you could actually use to pay your student loans back? Well, the standard payment type is 10 years. It's the least expensive from a standpoint of interest accumulation and repayment, but it might be the most expensive for the monthly amount of payments that you're making. It usually begins at about 1% of the balance that you currently have. So if you have, remember we talked about that average monthly student loan of $37,000. Well, if you take that $37,000 and multiply it times 1%, then the monthly payment is going to be somewhere around $370. The reason that is so important is because when we're trying to educate students on how much student loan debt is going to equate to in payment, because remember, usually it's not just one semester that you take out those student loans, it's 4 semesters or more that you're taking out those student loans. So you're signing off every month or every semester saying, yep, I agree to repay this money, and it gives you the estimated amount of payment that you're going to make. But what it doesn't do is tell you what the collective amount of payment it's going to be. And that's where a lot of people are really confused when they get to the end. Like, I don't ever remember seeing this number. So if you're in your 3rd semester, let's say, so you've got 3 semesters under your belt, actually going into your 4th semester, you go ahead and you fill out the loan application, and it says, well, you know, your monthly payment is going to be $50. You have to add that to the other 3 semesters of money that you've borrowed. So again, just remember that the standard payment, which is what it defaults to, by the way, if you don't ever do anything, you don't ever contact your servicer, this is what it defaults to. So it's the least expensive, as I mentioned, and it is what loans default to. There is another option where you can go with a graduated payment. So a graduated payment starts lower, but then increases every 2 years. And it might help when you're first getting your career started, right? Because ideally your income is going to be lowest when you first start out, but eventually your income is going to go up. And that's the thought process behind it. But it is an automatic 2-year increase. So it's not based on income at all. It just says every 2 years, we're going to ratchet those payments up. Then there's extended, and extended actually allows repayment up to 25 years. So you can take your loan payments and extend them out over an even 25 years, which is a mortgage period. So, I mean, when you think about that, that's pretty substantial. And of course, because the interest continues to be there, you know, that's going to be interest-wise an expensive option. But if that's what's going to allow you to meet ends meet and make your payment, then that's certainly an option. There's also income-based repayment. Now, income-based repayment deserves a whole nother special slide, so I'm going to be real brief here. But there's IBR, and I love the initials, right? IBR, pay, repay, ICR. It's like going to a hospital is what it sounds like to me. So there are 4 different types of income-based repayment plans, and those are really, really, really important to know what the differences are and how they work with public service loan forgiveness, because that's really critical. And then the 5th type of payment would be a consolidation, and we'll walk through some of the pros and cons of doing loan consolidation as well. So I mentioned that income-based repayments deserve its own special slide. Absolutely. So I'm going to dig into this just a little bit deeper here. So let me give you some history, because you may have loans that are older loans. And one of the things, I actually want to go back a couple of slides and point out a particular loan, type of loan. This federal family education loan right here, the FFEL loan, that loan has some special provisions attached to it if you are a teacher. So if you are in education, you need, and you have one of those loans, you really need to know what those rules are. You may be able to get $5,000 forgiven all the way up to $17,500 forgiven if you're in special education, and you don't even have to make a payment. You just have to have taught for 5 years. So you could have been deferring those payments down the road and be eligible for some forgiveness on those FFEL loans. Really, really, really important to know that. Becky and I worked with a young lady that has those types of loans, and helped her with that process. So there are some old loans out there that would be eligible for that kind of forgiveness. So in moving fast forward, under the direct loans, you can make different kinds of income-based repayment elections if you find that you can't make your payments, or if you would be eligible for public service loan forgiveness, you may want to choose one of these plans. So again, let me just kind of take a step back and give you some history on it. So in 2009, IBR came along and said, we'll allow you to make income-based payments based on 15% of your discretionary income. Now, discretionary income looks at what the poverty level is. So it takes your income and it subtracts off the poverty level, and that's your base. So we'll allow you to make payments as low as 15% of that discretionary income. 2004 came along, and 2014 came along, and it actually got reduced down to 10% of discretionary income. Then in 2007, so in between 2009, 2014, a new payment system came out that said pay as you earn. But you had to be a new borrower as of October 1st, 2007. So all those old loans didn't count. You had to be new money only to be eligible for pay. So if you have a student loan that you took out in 2006, wouldn't be eligible for pay as you earn. Has to be after October 1st of 2007. And the disbursement had to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 2011. So I know that makes absolutely no sense, and we can dig into those details more if you want, but just understand that there are some special rules behind pay as you earn as to what would qualify. Anybody taking a loan right now would obviously qualify, but that was 10% of discretionary income. So remember, discretionary income is determined by taking your current income minus off the poverty level in the household that you live in, and that's your discretionary income times 10%. Now, there's a special little rule in pay as you earn, Pay as you earn actually allows a couple to do married filing separately, and only for the married filing separately income to be included. So if you have a really high income earner in the household and the person who has the student loans is a low income earner, sometimes we'll actually recommend that they do married filing separately. That does mean that your income tax burden is going to be slightly higher. So you want to make sure that it's, you know, washing out properly for you. But that is an option within with the payee program. You can actually do a married filing separately option versus married filing jointly. Now, Repay came along in 2015, also said 10% discretionary, but guess what? You cannot exclude married income. Now, they do have a 50% subsidy clause in there over payee that says, hey, we'll make up the difference. It'll be subsidized. There will be a government subsidy for about 50% of the earnings that are accumulating through each of your monthly payments under this program. So there are some benefits to that, especially if you don't qualify for public service loan forgiveness. But the one thing that some people will do is they will switch from Repay to Pay in some cases where it would be beneficial to them. So I'm going to pause for a moment and I'm going to see if there's any questions, because that was a lot of information to share. Any questions?
Yes.
Okay.
All right. Our participant has private loans.
Okay. So private loans would not qualify for income-based repayment plans unless you can negotiate that with the actual lender. So a private loan is going to act just like a car loan, just like a mortgage. They're going to require that you make the payments, and they're not eligible for income-based repayment plans most of the time. Here's the one caveat that's really ironic to that. As you may know, student loans as a rule are not eligible for bankruptcy. So if you declared bankruptcy, your student loans are not something that can be included in that bankruptcy, even if they're private. So they've done a good job lobbying for that in the private industry, and it is not something that you can actually declare bankruptcy on in the Fed world either. Was that the question?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, perfect. So I mentioned student loan consolidation as a possible option as well. Student loan consolidation, you can take multiple loans and you can put them all in one nice little bundle, and instead of having all these different loans that you're making payments to, you can actually do one big lump sum payment. So the pros are that there are fewer payments to track, obviously, which is nice from a standpoint of I know my money goes in and it gets applied towards this. When you're talking about consolidating your loans on the public side, what they will do is average your interest rate. So if you have some loans at 7% and some loans at 4%, they're going to average those two loans. So your interest rate payments, your total interest rate is going to be the combination of all interest rates of your outstanding loans. So that's when your new interest rate is basically weighted to come up with how much you're going to repay. There might be the possibility for lower payments by extending those repayment terms. That's something that is offered within consolidation loans as well. And you might fall within multiple repayment planned options. The federal loan consolidation restarts the deferment and the forbearance clock, just for reference purposes. You may be able to get better rates on private loans if your credit score has improved. So why some people will do some consolidation with the private industry versus the public industry is the fact that they're getting a better interest rate. It's usually a lower interest rate, especially if you've worked a few years and your credit score is higher than when you first got out of college. then you may be eligible for that lower interest rate, and that would help you over time. But if you're in the public service spectrum, I would not recommend that you consolidate into that private loan, because you lose all of those forgiveness benefits, and you also lose the federal status, which has things like disability and death, and I would say clauses in them. So the cons, the loss of the federal benefits, as I already mentioned, you do when you consolidate into a private loan, you are no longer part of the federal program. So you lose those disability benefits that currently are written into those federal loans. Basically, it's a challenge to get those disability coverage on those student loans, but it is something that can be done, especially if it appears as though you are never going to be able to work. And there's major diagnoses out there like MS and MD, and some of those debilitating Parkinson's disease, those kinds of diseases that will not allow you to work and never will allow you to work. So those would be very beneficial benefits. So you want to make sure that you know what's going on in your health around those and know what your options are. Once you consolidate, you cannot unconsolidate, unfortunately. So I want to just reiterate a comment that I made about the FFEL loans. You could be losing some major benefits. Do not, without really good investigative work, consolidate those loans. You may still have two payments if you consolidate, one under the federal and one under the private, and that to some could be a con and to some could be a pro. And depending on if you stretch those payments out, you could end up paying more over the life of the loan. So just know at the very bottom, you'll see the loan forgiveness of a federal loan may be considered taxable income in the year the balance of the loan is forgiven. So we'll talk a little bit more about public service loan forgiveness, but I just want to point that note out as I lead into the next sort of discussion. Private loans, by the way, if you do some consolidation, here's some of the companies that you might go through, like a bank or a Sallie Mae, and I'll list out in the next slide some of the companies that are likely to be a private student loan company. So again, if you don't know whether you have private or public student loans, the list of the companies might give it to you. They also could be high interest rates. Loan forgiveness, as I mentioned, is very rare. And in some cases, people will actually use home equity for private loans instead of going out and getting loans. I caution against that, especially under the new tax law, because previously people were doing it because they felt like they could deduct the interest on their tax return on their Schedule A. But remember, if you attended last night's session, remember I mentioned that law has changed now. You can only deduct interest, home equity interest or mortgage interest if it was used for the acquisition or improvement of your home. So no more consolidation purposes, no more student loan purposes. And the problem with that is that they actually, on the home equity side, they actually said, look, this starts right now. Like, this is retro. So it's not just new loans. If you took a home equity loan out for your child's education in previous years, technically that money is not deductible on your Schedule A right now. Here's some of the loan refinancing companies that are actually out there. So if you see these names, you probably have a private loan. SoFi and Common Bond are probably the two biggest ones that we tend to work with whenever we're helping somebody do something on the private side. Okay, the big words, public service loan forgiveness. There's a lot of talk about this, a lot of talk. And one of the things that I hear a lot of people say is it going to go away? And of course, I don't know the answer to that with 100% certainty, but everything I've heard says that if you're in the program, you're probably going to be grandfathered. Now, I want to reiterate what I just said. If you're in the program, you're probably going to be grandfathered. So to my very first bullet, if you think you're in the program, fill out the service form each and every year. And there's two benefits to that. One benefit is if you think you're in the program and you're not, you'll find out immediately. And if you happen to leave an employer, you don't have to chase that employer down 10 years later and ask them to sign off on that form. So I recommend, if you are eligible for public service loan forgiveness, which means that you work in a 501c3, you're in education, maybe in a non-for-profit hospital, any of those 501c3 organizations, you may qualify for public service loan forgiveness on your federal loans. And you'll notice that it says must be under the federal direct program, not the private aspect of things. And a lot of times, depending on what you do for a career, we want those FFEL loans separate anyways. But it must be part of a federal direct loan program, has to be a charitable organization, 501c3 charitable organization that you work for, or education, hospital, that sort of thing. And must be under the standard or income-based repayment option plans. Must be under that. So that's really important, because what we saw it would have been in 2017 was the first year that people would have been eligible for this program. And what we saw was that people thought they were in the public service loan forgiveness program, but they were on the wrong payment program. They were not under one of the standard or income-based repayment options. Therefore, their payments that they had been making over the last 10 years did not qualify. So we encourage everybody to turn that form in every year, because if you do turn that form in and you're not under that program, they will notify you right then and there, and you can fix it. You can go on the right payment program. And I just want to caution you with regards to the service providers. This has happened before, it happened recently. We were working on a case with a student. We sent in all the documentation to come up with what the income-based repayment plan was for somebody who's going to ultimately qualify for public service loan forgiveness. The loan servicer came back with about a $300 payment that was higher than what we had anticipated, because they chose to take into consideration some overtime that this individual had on the pay stub that she submitted. We followed up with a letter to the loan servicing agency and said, no, this is how you calculate it. So it's really important that you stay on top of these loan service providers as well, in addition to understanding what your rights and the rules around public service loan are. And just because I know somebody was sitting in the room that they have the private loans, unfortunately, if you do consolidate into private loans, you're not eligible for this. So is the question, will public service loans be around for 10 years? Of course, we can't predict what Congress will do. You can save up to who knows what. I guess what I've said to people is, if you can afford to set some money aside in an investment account or emergency fund, once you get your feet underneath you, then you would have that money that could possibly be there if this goes away. But I think Congress would have a fight on their hands, I do believe. There is a history of grandfathering that takes place around public service loan forgiveness. If you look at the history of it, the grandfathering that takes place in 87, 93, and 2014, they said, okay, going forward, it's going to be this way, but previously it was this way. So I think that history is there. And with regards to the repay, there is the possibility, there's some legislation that says maybe they'll actually change that. Again, this is not anything that is written yet, but there's been a lot of discussion around that, and it would definitely remove the cap. Or they're talking about removing the cap. So some frequently asked questions that I just want to throw out there for people. Under the married filing separately loophole, like I mentioned earlier, some people will switch from repay to pay and file taxes separately. Just do remember the tax consequences associated with that you may end up paying more in income taxes. But if it if it makes sense from a monthly cash flow perspective, then that's the time to be able to do it. Consolidation loans does reset the clock. Be very careful on that. That is an issue that I have seen. In fact, recently, that one case that I was talking about, we did not want to consolidate the loan because the individual had been working in public service loan forgiveness type job, and she had been making the payments, and she was in the right income-based repayment program that would count towards that. So we did not want to consolidate her loans because we did not want the clock to start ticking. She had a little over a year already in. So be real careful around the consolidation of loans. The providers love to talk you into it. They love to tell you what a good deal it is, but just know the pros and cons for your situation. Is loan forgiveness taxable? If you're eligible for public service loan forgiveness, no, it is not. If you are making income-based repayments and you are not eligible for public service loans, then it is written into law that yes, they are taxable, either 20 or 25-year payments after you make those, and there's any balance left that is forgiven. That is written in such a way that says it will be taxable, any balance that is forgiven at that point in time. So if you're making income-based repayments and you've made those payments for 20 years and you have a balance of $20,000 left on that loan, and at that point in time it is forgiven, it's brought into your income taxes for that year, and now you have $20,000 extra that you have to pay taxes on. So understand the difference between, are you eligible for public service loan or are you not, and those potential tax consequences associated with it. So some good resources that we like to throw out there. Student Loan Hero is a fabulous website that you can go to and get lots of information. The studentloans.gov website, in fact, that's one of the places that I recently went to when I was looking for information around asking the provider to recalculate the student loan amount based on income when they looked at just her W-2. Studentaid.edu.ed.gov, and then that does some great repayment remodeling. I'm a big fan of a young woman by the name of Heather Jarvis, and she has a website called AskHeatherJarvis.com. She is an attorney who works very closely with financial planners, and does some work for us behind the scenes sometimes when we're struggling with certain situations. She has dedicated her life to helping people with student loans, and she is who I would retain if somebody came to me and their loan was like in default or something like that. And then another great website is forgivemystudentloandebt.org. So again, I guess I was a little shallow on the slides today. I want to leave some time for Q&A. Does anybody have any questions that they would like to ask?
Will any of those sites that you just listed help with information on private loans?
Private loans really, I mean, they'll educate you to a certain extent, but the problem with private loans is you've got to look at your loan documents, because it is a agreement between you and the financial institution, and that's pretty much what it is. I mean, you're really going to have to dig into those the loan documents to see exactly what you can and cannot do.
So Amy, I recently was working with a client. This is Nancy from Extension. And when I met with the client, she has recently been applying for disability, and she said she sent papers into Mohila to get a discharge because of disability.
Mm-hmm.
And when I looked at her papers, she misread it, and she said that what the paper said was they gave her forbearance, and she assumed it was forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a difference when you talk about default or forbearance or
Excellent point. The difference, so let me just give you a kind of a rundown of, that terminology, right? So when you look up studentloan.gov is a great studentloans.ed.gov is a great website because it gives you a lot of terminology that you might be confused about. But when you first graduate from college, you can request to defer your student loans for, I think the default is 6 months or something like that. So they know that you're out there getting a job. They know you may not have any, income at this point in time. So they're going to allow you to defer your student loans for a certain period of time, just by default, like it usually qualifies. You can ask for a longer period, right? So generally speaking, you can even say, well, can I go 12 months? And then you can renew that like every 6 months, basically, for a maximum of 3 years. So you can defer your loans once you get out of college for up to 3 years. So that's deferment. Forbearance, well, let's talk about forgiveness first. So forgiveness means you're done. I don't have to pay anything more. The organization has given you given you a free pass at that point in time. You're done making any student loan payments. So forbearance allows you to temporarily stop making your student loan payments, but it's not deferment, right? So it takes it the next step. And it's actually, so in some cases, when you come out of college and you're in deferment, that just says, I'm going to stop making payments. But forbearance allows that loan to basically the payments are postponed, but the interest continues to accrue during that period. And if you don't pay the interest during that period, and here's the part about forbearance, then when you start making your payment, that interest is then capitalized, and that's the new starting point. Forbearance is, if there's any way that you can avoid both deferment and forbearance, then I really encourage people to do it, because the difference usually with deferment, interest can actually, not long-term for deferment, but interest can be subsidized, or you may not be responsible for paying the interest as it accrues, where forbearance, you absolutely are responsible for it. And it's usually something that, again, we try to take people to the point of, well, can you make income-based repayments, which in some cases I have actually seen people's income-based repayment be zero, because their income is so low that when we do the formula, it is zero. But people don't know to apply for that. I'm like, I can't, they say I can't make the payment. And so they don't respond to the calls. They don't respond to the letters. They just ultimately let it potentially, the next step is default, right? So default puts the loan exactly what it says into default, and they can then guarantee your wages or go after the person that co-signed for you to get the payment. And student loan payments, all monies are on the table for guarantee, even Social Security. I had a case several years ago where it was a grandfather that had co-signed for a student loan, and the grandson was not making the payment on the student loan. And so they contacted him and said, if you don't start making payments, we're going to guarantee your income. And his only income was his pension and his Social Security. And they basically said, we'll go after Social Security. And they can. So grandpa had to start making payments on that student loan, or they were going to come after his income. I could tell you stories all day of cases like that are heartbreaking, but that is why I get up on my stool and talk about student loans so much, because I want to make sure the public is educated about what they might be getting into when it comes to student loans. Any other questions?
I don't know, Amy, if you want to take any time just quickly to maybe address people who are at the front end of this, like when they're applying for it, like they need to fill out a FAFSA, things to just kind of look out for before they sign on the dotted line?
Sure. So when you're applying for financial aid, what they call financial aid, which again, I'm jaded about that because I don't feel like student loans are financial aid. And remember, going back to, in fact, I'll share my screen again, going back to the types of student loans that exist. Remember that we talked about some are income, meaning some are financial needs based, like the subsidized loans, and others are not financial needs based, the unsubsidized loans. When you're filling out that FAFSA, a lot of people say, well, I'm not going to get any financial aid, so why should I fill out the FAFSA? Well, because you might be eligible for at least the unsubsidized student loans if you need them. But a lot of colleges also want you to fill that out for other loans that or other grants that they might have. So it's not just about the student aid that you might get in loans or grants from the state and federal government, but it's also about what the colleges might offer. Now, when you get your award letter in the mail that says this is what you're eligible for, if you don't need all of that money, don't take it. You know, we go through a program that's sort of like a pre-approval for college. And one of the things that we look at when we're doing that is, okay, how much is the cost of college? That's the number one thing, right? And then where are the resources going to come from? So actually sitting down and planning, are you going to get any scholarships? Are you going to apply for scholarships? Because one of the things that we often talk to parents and students about is the fact that if you don't ask for the money, you're not going to get the money. And a lot of people don't ask for the $250 and the $500 grants. Well, you know what? That means that you're more likely to get them. So what's the commitment on the student side to go get some of those scholarships and put that in the column of here's what I have to go towards the cost of college. Also, is the student going to work while they're in college and contribute towards the cost of books and interest maybe on the student loans? Are the parents committing a portion of their income towards the cost of college? Have they saved in a 529 or just in a regular investment account towards the cost of college? So we come down to that bottom line after we subtract all of those things and we say, oh, okay, well, this is what we need potentially for loans. But if you receive a offer letter that says you're eligible for $5,000 in student loans and you only need $2,000, well, only take the $2,000. Don't take the $5,000. Be aware of what your need actually is, I guess, is the moral to my story. So when you're filling that FAFSA out and then they send you back, the colleges send you back their award and offer letters. The other thing is go to the college and tell them, like, especially if you're a good student, go to the college and tell them, I need a little more. What would you recommend? Are there any grants that I can apply for? Are there any scholarships that I could apply for that would help with the cost of education? Because when I compare the cost of your school to the cost of other schools, it's a little outside our range overall. Sometimes the answer is no. Other times the answer is, well, we might be able to give you a little more, especially in private schools. We might be able to give you a little bit more here. Or we might be able to give you a work-study program or something along those lines. So asking the colleges for money is completely acceptable and something that all parents and students should actually do as well. So to try to avoid, the crisis that we're at, remember that 1.5 trillion crisis that we're at, sitting down prior to actually going to college and mapping out the cost for the 4 semesters or 5 semesters, 4 years or 5 years that you're actually going to college, I think that's the preventative nature of it.
Thank you.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed one of my favorite topics and you aren't depressed now that you know everything that at that very high level. There's so many more details that I could go into that were not included in this presentation, but I also wanted to make sure that I kept it within the hour, knowing that this is your lunch. I do appreciate you spending the time with me, and we hope that this has been a great opportunity for you to learn a little bit more about student loans. And if you have any questions, we have a section of our website that is dedicated to that kind of concept. And I know Becky continues to post her tip of the week every week around student loan and education planning. So you can like our Facebook page and you will receive that information in your feed. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Amy. Appreciate your time and your knowledge and your expertise. Very good. Thank you.